Welcome to another episode of Trending Echoes. I'm delighted to be your host today. We have a very special guest with us, His Excellency Sir Liam Fox, the former Secretary of Defense of the UK, and now the chairman of the Abraham Accords Prosperity Group. It's very nice to have you here with us.
It's a pleasure to be back.
I want to start off today's conversation with a simple question. Who is Sir Liam Fox when nobody's around?
Unshaven, because I hate shaving almost as much as I hate wearing ties, and with music on. So wherever I am, if I'm at home, if I'm in a hotel, wherever I am, and I'm not on parade, that's what it will be like.
So you grew up in a council house in East Kilbride before becoming a doctor and then pursuing your career in politics. How did that shape who you are today?
Well, the common factor, I suppose, in all of that was the type of household I grew up in. We didn't have very much money, but my parents were very focused on education. And so for Christmas and birthdays, we would tend to get books rather than anything else. And I was always a very avid reader as a child. And one day, someone gave me a book about science, a big, lots of pictures for a 10-year-old, I think an 8-year-old I might have been at the time. And that's where I got my fascination with all things scientific and medical. And it grew from there. But my parents always very much encouraged us to, my father was a teacher, taught French and Spanish, which I used to speak not badly, but now it's dreadful. It's embarrassing. But the household was always very focused on, if you learn, this is the way you get opportunity. So I suppose all those different things had resonances. My parents were quite interested in politics. They didn't have the same political views, but they encouraged us always to take an interest in current affairs, and I suppose all those different influences just added up over the years.
Growing up in a household that is very much interlinked with politics, is that the reason why you dropped medicine? And so what drove that decision to drop medicine and to pursue politics?
I never took a decision to drop medicine, as it were. I was interested in politics. I was interested at university. I was involved in politics then. When I became a doctor, I worked in the health service in Britain for 9 years before I went into politics. And for a time, I would go down on my afternoon off from my medical surgery to go down and do some speech writing for Margaret Thatcher when she was Prime Minister. And then the seat that I ultimately was elected for was becoming vacant because the MP was standing down, and they said, why don't you stand for that? And so I kind of went into politics earlier than I might have anticipated. And I always thought that if I don't like politics, I can go back to medicine. But, 32 years later, I was still there. It's people will say, the implication is often, why did you study for medicine? Why did you get all that experience and then go into public life? I think actually public life benefits from people coming from a much wider range of backgrounds. And medicine gives you a particular, I think, advantage in politics in that it teaches you a sense of proportion. So somebody who's having a cardiac arrest feels like a crisis. Somebody who writes something in a diary column in a newspaper that you don't like is an irritation. It's not a crisis. And a lot of people in politics don't really tell the difference between the two. So I think that medicine does give you a sense of perspective. But also, because of the nature of it, means that you understand people's problems. You have to, to be a doctor, you have to understand the patient's backgrounds and, their social factors as well as everything else. And you do develop a picture of what the country's like that you live in. And I often think that people who go into politics who've not done jobs outside politics are at a major disadvantage. And, if you want to govern a country, maybe you ought to know something about it before you do.
True. So 32 years, so over 3 decades in the parliament. Very simple. What do you think was your biggest achievement, but what was also your biggest regret?
So, in the big picture, Brexit, leaving the European Union, which I had wanted to do for a long time. But more personally, I passed the legislation in Britain for people with Down syndrome to give them more rights in education and health and social care. Because I think that how you treat the most vulnerable people in your society is a measure of how civilized your society is. What do I regret? Well, a lot of things, usually not speaking out when I thought I should have. And in the latter years in particular, I thought that the government was taking the wrong trend in its economic policy in particular. I remain an unreconstructed Thatcherite on the economy. And I thought that its immigration policies were too liberal. I think that we still have some way to go on that, and I'll be speaking in the UK in the not too distant future, setting out how I still think we need to redress that balance, because I think the new British government is taking those wrong trends even further in the wrong direction.
So many people say that Brexit harmed Britain's economy, especially when it comes to the younger people. Do you agree with the fact that Brexit is or was seen as the generational mistake?
Quite the opposite. So for me, Brexit was a constitutional issue, and it was about Britain being able to make its own laws without being interfered with by any outside power. To give you an example that maybe those who are watching will understand, I was asked the question on Bloomberg TV one time, why explain to an American audience why you want Brexit. I said, well, if in America there was a court in Mexico City or in Ottawa that could overrule the American Supreme Court, and there was nothing that Congress could do about it, you wouldn't like that. And they said to me, but we would never have allowed that to happen. I said, exactly. And for me, this was about Britain being able to take control of its own sovereignty. Now, of course, that has its pluses and minuses. It means that governments can make mistakes, governments can make greater achievements. Brexit simply said to the governments of the United Kingdom, you have more freedom to do what you want. Now, that's up to the people of Britain to decide which government they choose to put in that position. The arguments about trade, I don't think, don't hold up at all, because the majority of Britain's trade is outside the European Union anyway, and was always growing outside the European Union, including, it has to be said, with countries like the UAE, where the trade was becoming much greater. And Europe as a share of global trade is shrinking. So it made much more sense for Britain to give itself more freedom to trade with the growing bit of the global economy than the shrinking bit of the global economy. Now, whether Britain chooses to actually do that and take advantage of that freedom is up to the government of the day.
But what's your idea on, okay, so do you see cracks in the idea of global Britain? Or do you think, because you said that that Britain is stronger even outside of the EU, but do you think there is cracks when it comes to the idea of Great Britain?
No, but
not Great Britain, global Britain, sorry.
No, but I do think that in the world at the moment, we're moving back from a commitment to a very integrated global economy with the rise of more nationalist or protectionist thought. I actually believe that the application of free markets and free trade is the way in which we've taken 1 billion people out of abject poverty in the world. And without becoming too technical about it, if you believe in the concepts of comparative advantage in trade, of course you're going to have to continually adapt and to say, we want the benefits of global free trade, but we don't want the disbenefits in terms of what it may do to competitiveness in our own economies. You can't have it both ways. So you have to make the adjustments. And I think that if you try to apply protectionism, it will fail. And the in any country that says, how much of a tariff do I have to apply to a German BMW to stop my own population buying them, is the wrong question. The right question is, why are they not buying cars produced in my own country? And so I think that the global economy is so integrated in the real economy that if politicians try to disaggregate it, they will come up with big problems. And I think there's a second one, which is, if by doing so you make it more difficult for poor countries to trade their way out of poverty, you're much more likely to trigger a wave of mass migration, because people can see what prosperity looks like on their mobile phone. And if you deny it to them through legitimate means, they're much more likely to get on a boat or get on the road. And I think that for policymakers in the West, there is often a dislocation between their economic and trade policy and their security policy. And they often find out too late that decisions in one can have an impact that they don't like in another.
Okay, so when it comes to the US, many people argue that Britain now or has always followed the military interventions of the US. Do you think that Britain has completely lost their independent voice when it comes to military defense?
So one of the first things you learn in politics is never accept the premise of the question. So I don't accept that the UK slavishly follows the United States. I mean, recently on Ukraine, for example, Britain was way out in front in condemning the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and was way out in front of the United States in terms of what we should do about it and the response. And Britain's also acted, when its own interests have been threatened, even when the United States didn't want it. For example, when Argentina invaded the Falkland Islands, the United States was trying to get a negotiated agreement. Mrs. Thatcher said, no, aggression must be dealt with, and we have to free those people from the aggression of Argentina. So Britain will act independently. Mostly our interests coincide with the United States. And the United States is a very close ally. People talk about the special relationship, but the special relationship is actually based on security and intelligence and military, rather than anything political. And there are no two countries in the world that share intelligence as closely as the US and the UK. And that will continue to be, I think, the driving force behind the relationship. And it's a relationship that's too important to belong to any political party on either side of the Atlantic, or the chemistry between the leaders. The national interests are so strong that we need to overcome that. So sometimes you'll get a Republican president who has to deal with a Labour prime minister, or a Democratic president with a Conservative prime minister. They have to learn to make it work because it's in our national interest.
Security, I think, is a very important concept that needs to be put on the table. But with the emergence of radical groups and extremism, it is seen that Europe, particularly the UK, has now become a safe haven for extremist groups to just be there and talk freely. So what are your ideas on that?
People who share our values within a range of tolerance must be permitted to express themselves freely. Freedom of speech and freedom of worship are very, very deeply ingrained into our psyche and our way of living. What I think that we're having to learn is that there are those who are outside those parameters, who are extremely intolerant, and who will take advantage of the tolerance that is inbuilt in our system. And I think we're having to learn ways that we need to find a formula that says, if we tolerate these very intolerant people, they may come to dominate us. And so at what point does a tolerant society trigger the restrictions on freedom of speech or freedom of worship? And I think that we have a very clear set of beliefs in our country, and hate, and misogyny, are not allowed in our society. So I think that when it comes to groups like the Muslim Brotherhood, my personal view is that we've been much too tolerant of them. We've given them much too much space, as we have with other groups, as we have with the IRGC from Iran, for example. And it's kind of against our DNA to ban things, because we don't like banning things and giving the state the power. But occasionally the state needs to do so to protect the very values that we have. It's a very live debate, and it's a more difficult debate where you've got hundreds of years of tradition of free speech and free worship. But there is no doubt that we have been importing ideas into our country that are deeply against the values that we hold, and there is a limit to how much we can tolerate that. And I think that when it comes to groups like the Muslim Brotherhood, I think we should be much, much stricter in doing that. Partly, it's about getting the evidence that there are hate preachers out there, and there are people who are using the tolerance of our own society as a weapon against us. We need a full and open debate. I think there's a fear amongst especially metropolitan liberals that they mustn't appear to be racist or that they are intolerant of other religious views. But ultimately, the point you made earlier, national security is the first duty of the government, keeping its country and its citizens safe. And that means also safe from very poisonous rhetoric and from beliefs that could destroy our own tolerance from within.
I think being tolerant is one thing, but being aware is entirely different. I had this conversation with you before we started today's episode, and I'm like, there's no one that can be more of an Arab than an Arab, and there's no possible way a non-Muslim can be more of a Muslim than a Muslim. And if Arab and Muslim countries are now putting regulations and are identifying these radical groups as extremists, why have the West and in Europe opened their doors? And what regulations are they now putting onto the table to, I think, decrease the pores that are being appeared in their societies today?
So I think that one of the essential principles for our society is there is only one law, and that is the law that's made by our parliament and applied by our courts. There can be no application of Sharia law as an alternative to the secular law on which our country is based. Of course, many religious denominations will have their own internal rules, but they cannot be equivalent to the law of the country. And we are finding that there are some communities in the United Kingdom where they are applying that type of law. Now, you can say on one hand, they have a right to uphold the religious traditions. But what you can't do in a country like the United Kingdom is to apply those traditions in a way that are counter to the rules that we have. And one of the principles is that women are equal citizens. They have equal rights that are upheld by our law and our courts. And frankly, we should not be willing to tolerate women treated as second-class citizens because someone believes that their religion dictates it. All our citizens have to be equal in the eyes of the law. That's one of the essential principles that comes, from our own history, everything from Magna Carta all the way through to the reforms of the 19th and 20th century. So there comes a point where you can say, yes, having your identity is fine, but you cannot create second-class citizens as a consequence of that. And that's where you need to, I think, draw a line.
But what do you think are some of the regulations, or is Britain applying with this all digital age and the emergence of technology and us opening the doors on social media, freedom of speech? What regulations have, or do you think there will be a rise of more regulations on Britain's media content?
So we already have a very controversial piece of legislation to deal with online extremism, and the propagation of hatred and so on, it's very easy to say, I'm in favor of the principle of that. It's very difficult to draw the legislation that doesn't have unintended consequences. And of course, those who are hit by the unintended consequences are likely to be more vocal than the extremists that you're trying to restrict. So it's a learning curve. I think that we're all on it, where the age of social media is still relatively new. I think that we are discovering that while it is empowering for perfectly law-abiding people to express their opinions, it is also there for criminals, extremists, and destructive ideologues to use those very freedoms against society as a whole, and even more to prey upon the vulnerable. Now, you look, for example, at what's just been happening, the murder of Charlie Kirk in America, and you can see how social media can become an echo chamber for hatred and magnifying extremist views, sometimes very violent extremist views. And then you're faced with the difficult task in a free society of how do I restrict the freedom of the people who might do us harm without restricting the very legitimate freedoms of the people who will live within the rule of law. Difficult. And I think we'll take some years to be able to assess and get that balance right.
But don't you feel like the longer it takes, the harder it is to regulate it? Like, for example, now that the West and Europe is seen as a safe haven for these extremist groups and ideological that have ideological extremist ideas. So don't you think that the bigger the poor, the harder to regulate? Like, for example, now you're giving them space to get into education, media, but also the charity sector. So what are your ideas on regulating or what are the policies that have been made to close these pores on these three important sectors?
So there are already increasing restrictions on what's happening in our universities. The charitable sector is quite strictly governed anyway. I think it's about not the rules we have, it's about the application of the rules and making sure that the rules that we already have are properly applied and that they're applied in a consistent way, and that we don't take, for example, a tougher line with what we regard as political extremes, but we allow so-called religious extremes to be given freedom. And I think that there's a huge debate here that we need to have in all our countries. I particularly dislike the phrase religious extremists. I think they should be called extremists who use religion, because for these people, it's about political control. It's about the application of their views on everybody else. So it's not the idea of everybody finds their own way to God. It's there is only one way and it's my way, and if you don't do it, you're a heretic. Now, we shouldn't tolerate that at all as a concept. And yet, from the Spanish Inquisition to Sayyid Qutb to the Iranian Revolution, the behavior is all the same. It's nothing to do with salvation. It's all to do about coercion. And we need to call these people out. And when they try to use a veil of religion to justify their political ideologies, we need to be very clear that they're trying to apply a particular political or social code to us, which has nothing to do with the religion. And so when people are using religion as an excuse, we need to be very, very clear that this is not the religion. No, this is not Islam. This is a political ideology that is hijacking the identity of Islam to achieve its purpose or to give it greater cover in a certain part of the population. And I don't think that we necessarily, in Britain or Europe or in other parts of the world, we've not really got the language right yet to remove the cover from these people.
So why hasn't the West or Europe yet classified these groups as extremist groups yet?
Well, there's a very live debate about it. I mean, I think that they should be. I think the Muslim Brotherhood should be banned. Others take a different view. And in a democratic society, you have to make the case. And we have banned other groups because of what they can be clearly shown to be doing. And as I said, I think that we've had a reticence about banning, which I think is good. You don't want to rush into banning things, otherwise you become a different type of state, a different type of society. But on the other hand, when do you draw the line? And I think that for me, it's when tolerating the intolerant becomes a risk to the security of the state and the survival of tolerance itself. And when you feel that you have no alternative, that's when you act. And I think that we need to be clearer about what are the intellectual elements of that test that we apply. And the debate needs to be less politicized, and I think it needs to be more intellectually clear than it sometimes is. And I think, it's a debate that we've not had to face for a long time. In the 1930s, Britain was tolerating the rise of British fascism up to a point, until we realized that this is actually a threat to our national security and the very survival of the sort of society that we have. And, a good example of where democracy can be subverted for that was what happened in Germany. When Adolf Hitler was elected, people forget that he may have become a dictator, but he was elected first. And so we need to constantly be on our guard. And sometimes we have to make decisions which are emotionally uncomfortable for us to make. But that's why we elect governments. They're there to make the difficult decisions.
But don't you think it's too late? Or do you think we still have time?
No, we've still got time. And you can blow the problem out of proportion as well. Britain is still a very tolerant, democratic society that just needs to recognize that being too tolerant can have its own limitations and its own problems.
Moving from instability, extremism, now I talk more about you being the chairman of the Abraham Accords Prosperity Group. What are your main objectives on this particular project or initiative?
So what I learned from politics was that everything, particularly in Western democratic politics, is too short-term. It tends to be done on electoral cycles, 3, 4, 5 years. The problems that face the Middle East are very, very deeply ingrained. And as I often say, in a country like Britain, we are hugely shaped by our history. In the Middle East, too many people are prisoners of their history. And to change that requires a generational change. It requires to change the thinking of the next generation of young people so that they see people in other countries not as the personification of a flag, but as people. And we need to create more partnerships across borders. We need to build more businesses across borders. We need to create interdependencies so that people gradually change. But you can't create peace overnight, because peace is much more than the absence of conflict. Peace is also about stability and justice and opportunity and all the things that people who come from a country like mine take for granted. And as I say, I grew up in a country I can choose my government, I can choose my religion, I can speak freely. These are my birthrights. And they're the same birthrights as people across the Middle East. It's just that in some cases, those birthrights have been hijacked or stolen. We need to ensure that they're restored. And you cannot also buy peace, but you can invest in peace. And that's what we want to do. We want to, over time, over a much longer time scale, start to give people more of a stake in the economic well-being of their societies. People who've got nothing to lose may gamble with it. People who've got something to lose will be much more circumspect about the decisions they take. But that takes time. And as I say, the three things that I think are prerequisites: you've got to give people hope, you've got to give people opportunity, and you've got to give people dignity.
True.
And if you can give them those three things, you might get the elusive fourth thing, which is trust.
Yeah.
And if you can do that over time, then do so. But we'll not be able to do it in short-term programs, and we have to do it from the bottom up. It's all very well. The Abraham Accords is a wonderful initiative. It's done, I think, tremendous things already. The problem is that it's very top-down. It's very focused on the international diplomacy and international trade and so on. Where is the tangible benefit on the Arab street? My view is, unless we can create that over the next decade, then you will get a dislocation between the political process and the acceptance of it by young people. And so we thought about how we would go about achieving that. And the main vehicles that we have is we've created something called Reach, which we launched here at Trends, I'm tremendously pleased to say. And that's a communications platform talking to young people about business through a medium that they like, in English and in Arabic, and giving young people real life stories about people like them who've set up businesses, and saying to them, this could be you. Why not next? And we can help you to do that. And then, having given them, if you like, the hope, we provide the opportunity through an investment fund which will invest in new businesses, invest in young businesses that are already up and running, that will help provide franchises for young people to take up. And remember, McDonald's created more millionaires than anything else in history. And also, we want to look at the service sector here. Why are we not taking young accountants in Bahrain and the UAE and Morocco and Israel and giving them capital to set up an online accountancy business across the whole region? We've got tools in social media. We've got, in the new age of communications, which, as you said earlier, may have their downside, but let's use their upside too.
True.
Let's use the ability for them to cross borders and create new businesses. So we'll be doing all of that when we launch the fund in the near future. And we also wanted to bring in, again, Trends as part of this, create an international body which brings think tanks together. So here, the Amadeus Institute in Morocco, our own group in the United Kingdom, other groups from other countries, so that we're giving a space for the thought leaders to be out there talking about issues, national and international, which governments can then look at and say, we think that's a good idea, we think that's a bad idea. But the thought leaders of today will be the political and business leaders of tomorrow. So let's bring them with us, and let's try to get them on to a different path. As a doctor, I say, we've all got our parents' DNA. If we all make exactly the same choices as our parents, we'll end up in the same places as our parents. And at the Abraham Accords Prosperity Group, we're aiming to ensure that those different choices are available and they're real.
So I always say that you're not born to see the differences, you're taught to see the differences. And I think the Abraham Accords just shows the world that we can actually bring people together despite where they come from or who they pray for or what their religion is. So the Abraham Accords, and just like the Abraham Accords Prosperity Group that you now lead, brings people, Arabs, together with Israel, but also non-Arabs in the region. Do you think, however, the Palestinians are being left behind in all of this?
Well, it's an issue of enormous historical complexity. But you cannot get peace by excluding one group of people from the benefits of peace. And so it needs to be dealt with. There needs to be a solution. What people call the two-state solution, of Palestinians having some kind of place they can call their own, that they govern, living side by side with an Israel whose borders are secure. I think, however, we sometimes put, as we say, the cart before the horse by talking about the the political elements rather than the security elements, because it seems to me that there's a prerequisite here, which is if there's going to be any form of Palestinian state, authority, call it what you want, who will guarantee its security? Who will guarantee its borders? And at the same time, who will guarantee Israel's security and borders, given the Hamas attack in which 1,200 civilians were murdered? So you need to think about the security, and I think that requires powers outside the region to come in and give a guarantee of security. I think that once you've created the security architecture, then you can talk a bit more about, which territories, which people, which rights, and so on. I think that's really important, but I think it's also important to not allow that to become the only issue across the Middle East and North Africa. There are demographic issues, a lot of young people. How do we find gainful employment for this young generation so that they are not sitting there to be, the fodder for extremists? How do we ensure that the energy issues across this region are dealt with? The water issues of the 17 most water-stressed countries in the world, 12 of them are in the Middle East and North Africa, with big populations in urban centres, which will exacerbate that problem. How are we thinking about all these issues? And we need to think of them all together. You can't just take one issue. But what I would say is, if you're looking for a guiding principle in all of that, is that none of us are passengers in our own destiny. We all need to exercise our personal responsibility and take responsibility for our own actions. And there will be consequences of our own inaction if we choose to do nothing. And so, as I would say, none of us can choose where we came from, but we can all choose where we're going to. And that, I think, is the challenge for every single individual. Do you, as I said when we were at Trends launching Reach, do you want to just read history?
Yeah.
Or do you want to write history? And that's a choice that's open to every one of us, whatever our background. In our own way, we can all change the trajectory for the future.
You have authored many books that touch base on different and various topics, and one of them was water. What book do you believe had the most impact and influence?
On me?
Yes.
Well, so that's a difficult question to answer, because in the technical realm, there are hundreds. When you're writing on a big global subject, you have to read a lot. I might pick out a medical textbook. So my favorite of all my medical books is called Grant's Atlas of Anatomy, because it is the story of who we are, and what we are. But I also I like novels, and I think everyone should have a favorite novel that they go back to for comfort. When they want to find that little safe space, and we all need to have one of those. So I would always say to people, find a novel that makes you happy, and that you can be lost in. Find another world that you can see. I'm one of those people who can pick up a book, and if I become engrossed in it, breakfast, lunch, and dinner will go by, and I'll still be reading it. So. That's how I was brought up, and I still have I love a lot of the British writers. I love Charles Dickens, though it's quite hard to read. And I just think that it's so wonderful, the amount of effort that a novelist puts into that, to creating a world. You get to share it. You get to drop into that in a very personal way. So, and we all have our favorites.
A couple of weeks ago, I asked a friend, because I was so into books that were like life-changing, like Atomic Minds and Let Go, the Let Them theory. So I was like, what novel do you recommend? She was like, Verity. So never thought I was the kind of person that would read a novel. First page passes by, and without me knowing, I'm 50 pages into the book, and I'm gasping. I'm like, And I'm just like, oh my God, am I gasping while reading? Is this what novels do? So I think the last question of today's episode would be, what is one novel or book that you would recommend to the youth?
So my personal, there are authors who I will read. So Robert Harris,
Okay.
I love his books, but they have the ability, he's a great storyteller. They have the ability to engross me. But if I was to pick one novel, one Christmas, my little sister bought me a copy of Wuthering Heights, which I'd never read. I'd never read when I was younger. And I always thought maybe it's a bit girly. I was blown away by it, absolutely blown away by it. I thought it was a novel of such emotional intensity and dark, dark drama. I think it's a magnificent book, and I think anyone who wants to read one novel in English, read Wuthering Heights. It's almost unbelievable that a young woman would have written a book that's got as much dark passion as this, and it's fabulous. It's a world all of its own, and if you've never been to the north of England, to Yorkshire, and you don't need to go, this book takes you there without having to leave your seat.
I think, thank you so much for today's episode. I really enjoyed today's conversation with
Likewise.
you, and I'll take your recommendation to consideration. Thank you for being with us in the episode of Trending Echoes.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.